right, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Really, really excited to have you here again. I see some familiar faces. I see some new faces. I don't know who to make eye contact with for the new faces. But it's really, really great to see this room once again, pretty full. It's really been a wonderful quarter for the kids and the adults in the program. We have a very special program for you tonight. We'll be beginning with an ensemble piece, and then the students will go off stage, or everybody will go off stage except for the performers, who will be playing solo works, one after another. You have some programs in the form of QR codes, but we'll also be announcing the pieces and the names of the people playing. So yeah, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure, and let's do this. Ready? Let's go. so that we may begin the solo parts. This first piece that we heard was the Pavane by Fauré, a French composer, who was an early representative of what would later become the Impressionist period. He is especially famous for his songs, and in classical music, as I'm sure you've heard if you've come to this concert before, song is a very specific thing. It is something that is sung by the human voice, accompanied usually by an instrument. So he's very famous primarily for his vocal works, but he is also pretty well known as a composer of atmospheric music that goes in and out of tonality, which is what we've experienced in this beautiful piece. So now I'm going to rebuild the stage a little bit, and then we will ask our first soloist to come to the stage, and that will be Caleb. Do you have a favorite chair? Yeah. This one? Perfect. All right. So, I also forgot to mention that in the programs that you have in your phones, QR codes, you will be able to see the current piece that is being played, just as soon as I actually activate that feature. And I'll let Caleb introduce the two pieces that he will be playing for you. So, that being said, Caleb Virkstis.
Today, the first piece I'll be playing is a collection of two pieces. It's Gavotte I II by Johann Sebastian. And yeah. Valseana by Sergio Assad. It's a much newer piece and has much more interesting harmonic ideas. And Sergio Assad is a composer who is very special to me, and his pieces draw a lot of emotion and make me think about my own life.
Seamus with more Bach. And I would like to actually note that if you look on your programs tonight, you'll notice that this happens 3 times. We have multiple instances of composers being played by multiple people and actually not being next to each other in the program. That is on purpose to keep variety and to hopefully create a really beautiful mix of pieces. So, that being said, Seamus, take it away.
My name is Seamus Byrne, and I'll be playing the Gigue double from Suite 2 by Bach.
and Caleb, they are both from suites, and suites are this form that used to be very popular in the Baroque period, where you have a number of dances from the court, basically court dances in a row. You have an Allemande from Germany, a Courant from France, a Gigue from England, and so on. And this specific one that we just heard, the Gigue in the double, the Gigue is traditionally at the end of a suite, if anywhere at all. It is not one of the movements that is compulsory for it to be a suite. And then the double is basically just the faster, more virtuosic, and more impressive version of the Gigue. So this is the sort of height of virtuosity in a suite that we've just heard. And in the case of the Gavottes that Caleb played just before, those were also some of the later dances inside a suite. The suite typically starts with a very sort of rigid, solidified core of a few dances that are always there. And then towards the end, Bach likes to get a little more frisky. He adds gavottes, which are not in there initially. He adds doubles, sometimes 2 or 3 minuets. It gets fun. So both of these excerpts that we've heard from the suites by Johann Sebastian Bach or from that part of the suite. And now, I've spoken enough. I will pass it on, not to you, but to Michael. Michael. Would you like to start with the first one out there?
Sorry.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, Michael.
So I'm Michael. I'll be playing 2 pieces for you today. I'll introduce them as they come, but the first one is titled Adelita by Tárrega, a Spanish composer. Pretty short, pretty sweet. We like it. Can I get a different chair?
Would you like one of these?
Yeah.
The subtle difference between the chairs is primarily in the height of the chair. And some people are so motivated to use one chair or the other that I knew people who would support their chair to start competitions from home.
See, it's real. I was making it up. Bachianinha No. You'll notice it has Bach in it. Sorry, it's a lot Bach today. But it's Bach influence. And it's by a Brazilian composer. He's pretty modern, so it's closer to Brazilian folk music than it is strict classical music. But I hope you enjoy.
How dare you apologize for too much Bach? There's no such thing. There is actually an intermediate composer that bridges the gap between Bach and the music that we've just heard, and that is Heitor Villa-Lobos, a very, very famous Brazilian composer that is quite revered in the guitar world, despite actually having a much bigger career composing for other instruments outside of the guitar. And he wrote a famous cycle of songs called Bachianas Brasileiras. And the most famous one, number 5, was written for soprano and 8 cellos, which is just a very interesting combination. So Paulinho here is referencing not only Bach himself, the original, but also the Bachiana that Villa-Lobos wrote, inspired by Bach. And the Bachianinha just basically means small little Bachiana. So it's a sort of third order homage to Bach. So with that being said, I would like to finally call back on stage our next performer, Johnny Bhaskar.
My first piece I will play is titled Capricho Árabe, and it was composed by Francisco Tárrega, who was also the composer of one of Michael's pieces. Brothers Grimm, who wrote all the fairy tales, were born, and she writes about the beauty of the sea in the wake of World War II.
remainder of the ensemble works. This is actually Johnny's first end of quartet recital, and also his first year with us. So. So, for the next piece, I will ask in a second, I'll ask the ensemble to step back on stage. And I want to introduce it a little bit. We've heard two short songs by this composer last quarter that we had a recital, so not in the summer, but in the spring. And for those who weren't there, the great thing about John Dowland, the composer of these next few works, is that he was probably the world's first singer-songwriter, in the sense that he would play, or at least the first one that became really famous. Let's call it like it is. He would play the lute and sing at the same time and accompany himself. And he had a real stage persona. He had, he had a vibe. He would finish all his letters, all his letters with words like, forever crying, forever in tears, yours, John. So John Dowland was a really, really colorful character, and he wrote some of the late Renaissance's most famous works. The greatest thing about those two works that we're going to play for you today is that they have lyrics. Now, you won't hear the lyrics because we won't be singing, unfortunately, this time. Well, that'll be fun. But the lyrics are always the title plus the next few words from the song. So the first song is called If My Complaints, also known as If My Complaints Could Passions Move. And I want to read you a little bit about from the lyrics before we play. So you can try to sing it along in your head as we play it and see if you can follow the sound of the guitar. So it goes something like, if my complaints could passions move, or make love see wherein I suffer wrong, my passions were enough to prove that my despairs had governed me too long. Oh love, I live and die in thee, thy grief in my deep sighs still speaks, and so on. So that he was basically Lana Del Rey, but from the late Renaissance. So If My Complaints, followed by Go Crystal Tears. All right, let's get back on stage, everybody. The next piece we're going to be playing for you is finally not a song arrangement. This has been a bit of a theme in tonight's program. This is the famous Toccata by Leo Brouwer for guitar quartet. So we're playing it as a larger ensemble. It was originally for a guitar quartet. And the Toccata has a really interesting history within the music tradition, the classical music tradition. It started out meaning just simply peace. So in Italian, when they would sing something, that would be a cantata, it would be sung, it literally just means sung, and when you would play it, it would be a toccata, a played. So is it a song or is it a piece? Is it a cantata or is it a toccata, right? In this case, it just means piece. But over the years, over the centuries, the word toccata came to mean a certain thing. It came to be associated with a certain style of music. And it tends to be relatively fast-moving music with a relatively even rhythm, a lot of repetitive rhythms inside of it, and oftentimes a bit of a show-offy piece. And I think that this toccata is not show-offy, but it does have that relentlessness that defines toccatas in later, sort of more recent centuries. So Leo Brouwer is probably the most famous living composer that wrote the majority of his works for guitar, or started out as a guitarist. And I feel a very close personal connection to him because he was my professor's professor. So he's kind of like the grandfather, my musical grandfather, you could say. So with that being said, let's enjoy Toccata by Leo Brouwer. At the end, but I think they deserve all the applause. So, the last and final piece we're going to be playing for you tonight is actually an arrangement of a very famous jazz standard known as Take Five. Take Five was initially groundbreaking because it was relatively uncommon in jazz to have music that is in compound meter. So 5 refers in this case to the 5 beats in a bar. It's a little bit of a pun. So a bar or measure in music is a cycle of a finite number of beats, and these beats tend to be simple, 2, 3, or 4. Very rarely do we have other numbers in jazz, or at least at the time that this standard became famous. And this was an attempt to use 5 for an unusual experimental bar composed of 2 smaller measures of 3 plus 2. And to make it sound really pretty and catchy and jazzy, and not to make it obvious at all that something interesting is happening with it. So I think this piece started out as an experiment, and it became by far the most popular composition of the Dave Brubeck Ensemble, who actually were the first performers of this piece. So, as with any other jazz standard, there's millions of versions of it. Jazz is not like classical music. You don't have a standardized way to play things. The theme itself is standard, but what you do with it is not. So, in accordance to that, traditionally I have a few surprises planned for you today, which I will not talk about because then they wouldn't be surprising anymore. So, with that being said, thank you so much for coming once again. Please stay in touch. Please come back. There's a little mailing list you can join on those programs if you open them. So take one home and do it if you don't have time to do it right now. Really appreciate you coming in such large numbers as always. I think we are blessed to be in a department that always gets really nice attendance for our recitals, and I think that's the most beautiful thing we can accomplish. So thank you. You are making that possible. All right. With that being said, please enjoy Take 5. Oh yes, and this arrangement is by Emilio Orejuela. It's important because in jazz, arrangements play a big role. See you at the next one.